The Washington Capitals found themselves out of the playoffs, an unfamiliar place for this team, but can they get back next year? Dan Holmi of Locked On Capitals joins us to discuss that, the future of Max Pacioretty, and a lot more on today's Locked On NHL podcast.
You're Locked On NHL, your daily podcast on the National Hockey League. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome back to the Monday edition of the Locked On NHL podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. I want to thank everyone who makes Locked On NHL your first listen every day. Don't forget to subscribe on YouTube, wherever you get your podcasts, so you can get new episodes as soon as they drop. And now you can even find us on SiriusXM on the SXM app. Just do a search for Locked On NHL. It is great to welcome back to the show the host of Locked On Capitals, Dan Holmi. And Dan, it's been an interesting offseason for the Caps, a team that hadn't missed the playoffs in a while, sort of finding themselves out of the postseason running. And their big move in the offseason was the signing of Max Pacioretty. But where exactly and when exactly is he going to fit into this lineup?
Well, the Capitals were able to get Max Pacioretty because of his Achilles issues. He's had the last couple seasons, he's had issues with that. Listen, the Caps were tight against it with the salary cap, only $888,000 and change. But Max Pacioretty 6 times in his career has scored 30 goals. That is ultimately what they're looking for out of Max Pacioretty. Alex Ovechkin carried the bulk of the mail for the Caps as far as goal scoring was concerned last year. The year before, you saw production from Tom Wilson and Evgeny Kuznetsov. They rounded out the top 3 goal scorers. That's ultimately what they were looking for. If you watched free agency, there weren't a lot of dazzling deals, I guess I would say, a lot of bargain basement type stuff. Max Pacioretty was a good deal. They got him for $2 million plus $2 million more if you meet certain incentives. I like it. I do have reservations about it. But what I've told everyone on my podcast is that if he had not had those Achilles issues, the Caps wouldn't have been able to afford him. So that is why they got him. That and Joel Edmondson were the 2 bigger moves, I guess you could say. But I'm cautiously optimistic about Max Pacioretty. If they can get any kind of production somewhat similar to that out of him, that would be really a great thing.
Do you think he'll be ready to start the season on time?
He will not be. We know that 100% for sure. He came out and said as much. Worst case scenario, it will be November. So, I mean, that will give the opportunity, and we'll talk about that a little bit later, about some prospects, their opportunity to shine in his absence. But I do think that, he will be there for a lion's share of the season. I'm just kind of keeping my fingers crossed that we can get Max Pacioretty of old and not the guy the last couple seasons that's had those major injuries.
Now, you mentioned Pacioretty. Well, first of all, where do you think he's going to play once he's ready to come into the lineup?
I've heard, like second or third line. I guess it remains to be seen how the prospects do in training camp, that kind of thing. But they are just looking for that extra production. I guess I can't really look into a crystal ball as of yet because I want to see how everything shakes out. I still believe that Brian McClellan is going to make some big move before the start of the season. I know in order to make a move like that, you're going to have to move a piece out. And I don't want to go too far into the weeds here, but Evgeny Kuznetsov has been a guy that's been on the hot seat along with Anthony Mantha. So I guess that I would be able to give you a more accurate idea closer to the start of the season. But I kind of tend to believe that there is a bigger move up Brian McClellan's sleeve. I guess I don't know who that's going to be, as some of the bigger names like DeBrincat, I'm crossing off my list at home of potential players that they could have been. But I do think that he will probably figure to be in the second or third line.
You mentioned another move. What do you think the Caps are looking to add if they are going to make a hockey trade?
They want another big goal scorer. Ultimately at the end of the day, the blue line, I think, is pretty much solidified. They got all the big pieces, all the RFAs, the UFAs. They were taking care of the ones that were going to stay here. So that's what they're looking for, is another big-time goal scorer. And one of the things that I will talk about in tomorrow's episode of my own podcast is kind of shooting for the stars. What kind of difference would a Nylander make for the Capitals? Huge. Because, where the Capitals are poised right now, I'm not feeling too optimistic. I know there was a coaching change, and sometimes you can get a bigger result out of that. But I think they need to make a huge change, similar to like a Nylander, something like that, in order to get a bigger result. The tough part, however, is in order to land someone like Nylander, like I alluded to earlier there, they only have $888,000 in cap space. They're going to have to move someone out. And what is that big piece that they're going to have to trade to get someone like a Nylander? A lot of the people, the players on the team are diminished good. Nick Backstrom 5 years ago would have been a good deal. TJ Oshie, everyone else can see the back of their hockey card. They're injury prone. That is where the whole Tom Wilson thing came in. That, wouldn't that be crazy? On my podcast, everyone's like, well, Tom Wilson, they're never going to trade a guy like that, but he retains a tremendous value. So I think that ultimately that's what it's going to be, is they're going to make a big acquisition between now and the start of the season. It's just intriguing for me to think who that will ultimately be.
Well, it's going to be certainly interesting to see. And with the cap so tight, there's not a lot of teams that have a lot of room to maneuver. Let's see what the Capitals organization can do. Talk to me about some of the younger players we alluded to earlier, who, before Max Pacioretty, for example, is ready to return, will probably get a shot at being in the lineup regularly.
So that's the thing, too. Connor McMichael, it's always been the year for Connor McMichael. Not next year. No, next year. And then when he does get his big opportunity, he ends up playing the wing. His native position is the center position. That is where he really excels. And the last couple seasons, he's been relegated to the fourth line, like left wing. That's not where he's going to excel. Next season has got to be the season that the Capitals are all in on Connor McMichael, a player that we've heard about for years. The interesting problem, however, is where does he fit up? Where does he fit? Who comes out of the lineup for him to go in? The thing that is going to be a game changer this next year is Spencer Carberry. He has that history, being that he was a coach for the Stingrays, the Hershey Bears. He knows Connor McMichael. He can take the face off the clock and look at the gears and know what kind of player he is. Also, Hendrix LaPierre, a bit of a bumpier ride for him last year, but I do think that the arrow's pointing up for him as well. Not to mention Vincent Iorio, a really great blue liner. A lot of these players are most likely going to be a couple years out. But for me, Connor McMichael, he's the guy to circle. This is his make or break season. That is my belief on him. And not to mention the bigger things that were done at the draft, So I think that, I don't know what kind of result the Capitals are going to get this next season. But if you can look to the horizon a little bit, I think this team is going to be one to be reckoned with in the Metro Division.
All right. Well, it should be interesting to see how it all plays out. Dan, why don't you tell our viewers and our listeners where they could find the podcast and where they could find you on social media?
Yeah, so you can find me on Twitter. It's at DanCaps218. You can find the show on Twitter. It's at Locked On Caps. And of course, we're available on YouTube and the SiriusXM app and wherever you find your podcasts.
Dan, always a pleasure. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you.
Today's episode is brought to you by a product I literally use every day, AG1. Maybe you're like me, you want to be healthy and eat well, but it's always easier said than done. That's no longer the case with AG1. With one delicious scoop of AG1 in a glass of water each day, you're absorbing 75 high-quality vitamins, minerals, whole food source superfoods, probiotics, and adaptogens to help you start your day right. This special blend of ingredients supports your gut health, your nervous system, immune system, energy, recovery, focus, and aging, all these things. An AG1 costs you less than $3 a day. You're investing in your health, but it's cheaper than your cold brew habit. If a comprehensive solution is what you need from your supplement routine, then try AG1 and get a free 1-year supply of vitamin D and 5 free AG1 travel packs with your first purchase. Go to drinkag1.com/NHL Network. That's drinkag1.com/NHL Network. Check it out.